Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the podcast titled When Wildfire Comes. My name is Dr. Christopher Potter, and I'm a wildfire scientist with over 30 years of experience working for our space agency, NASA, and also with a lot of local communities who have been impacted recently by wildfires. I've studied these events on the urban interface using satellite imagery and ground-based measurements for nearly all the most destructive fires in the Western U.S., those that have destroyed a lot of urban areas and housing developments. We've also published dozens of science papers on these events in terms of the science behind them and the patterns of burning, and also some on fire weather. I also happen to myself live in a high risk wildfire zone in Northern California, so have experienced what it's like to see a fire starting to develop and coming towards our local community. But today we're going to hear from our special invited guest, uh, who is with the National Weather Service, and we're going to talk a little bit about uh, fire weather in Southern California. We're going to talk today with Richard Thompson, who is an incident meteorologist in the Los Angeles area for the National Weather Service. Rich has got a wealth of experience in dealing with the very intense winds and dry winds that fuel wildfires in Southern California. And so today we're going to hear about his experience as an incident meteorologist during fires and leading up to fires. It's not a breaking news report. We're going to talk about fires that occurred last year. But it's a case study in the podcast series when our guest recounts their experiences and firsthand observation of a wildfire event and lessons to be learned, both scientifically and locally from such event. So today, very pleased and honored to welcome our special guest, Richard. Why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background?
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. Again, my name is Rich Thompson, and I am an incident meteorologist with the National Weather Service here in Los Angeles, Oxnard. I first joined the National Weather Service back in January 1993. Interned 2 years in Chicago. Then in the summer of 1995, I got the forecaster job out here. So I've been out here in the LA office since summer of 1995. As an incident meteorologist, or IMET for short, I've been in the IMET here at the office since 2006. And throughout my time in the IMET program, I have been on, I believe, 84 different IMET assignments in my weather service career, which, kind of badge of honor is the all-time record for IMET dispatches in the National Weather Service. So I've been at this a long time, and I've been here at the office in Oxnard for close to 30 years. I've seen most of the weather extremes we've experienced here in Southern California. So it's definitely been an interesting ride here over my career at one office. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah, wow, you've seen more than just about anybody then.
Yes, I have. I'm
and
old. I'm old. Yes, I have.
that's amazing. That's great to tap into your experience base then here and put some of these most recent fires into more of a historical context, I guess, in terms of the kind of weather that caused the Eaton fire and the Palisades fire to result in such the destruction of over 10,000 buildings, structures in each one. So really, really extreme. I guess we could kind of start there. Would you like to set us up for what you were observing in early January last year and how things were setting up for some of the worst catastrophes we've had there in LA County in terms of wildfire on the urban interface? What was happening?
Oh, definitely. And one thing I'll say is my entire career here at Oxnard, I think my entire office's performance leading up to the January wildfires and during the January wildfires was definitely the best that I've seen this office ever do. Upwards of a week in advance of January 7th, when the fires broke out, we were advertising moderate to strong Santa Ana winds and the possibility of some very extreme fire danger. And as we got closer to the event on like the 5th and 6th of January, our office was issuing particularly dangerous situation red flag warnings, which is a very red flag warnings issued for really extreme events. Because we're looking at things and how things are shaping up model-wise. It was looking like a very, very strong Santa Ana wind event with wind gusts, in excess of 70, 80 miles per hour. And along with the Santa Ana wind pattern that we had developing over the area, we also had the same situation where it could actually develop some mountain wave activity at the same time, which is it was only going to enhance the wind potential across the area. So it's definitely, in terms of a wind event, one of the most significant wind event setups that I've seen in my career here. Then on top of that, what made this so troublesome is the fact that we had not seen any rain for over 9 or 10 months in Southern California. So in January of 2025, the vegetation in terms of moisture content and things like that was like at July, August levels. It was very, very, very dry. And so that was the one thing that was different, because Santa Ana's in Southern California, they start maybe from September and go all the way through wintertime. And usually you'll find your strongest Santa Anas occur in January and February. However, there's usually not much of a fire risk, because by then, by January, February, we've had enough rain to where the vegetation is very moist, and so it doesn't really conducive to any sort of large fire spread. But unfortunately, last year in January 2025, we hadn't had any rain. So not only did we have the strong wintertime Santa Ana that's set up across the area, we had very dry conditions, vegetation that was like, say, the July, August, September levels in terms of moisture content. So it's very dry, very crispy, if you will. And so that just set the stage, for a significant potential for a significant fire outbreak. And unfortunately, that did happen. So.
So that sets yourself up both in wind and humidity, and what I know is called what all of the fire weather community calls a significant vapor pressure deficit, right?
Yes.
Which means there just isn't as much humidity in the air as no absolute amount in the air as as usual, as you would expect. So these Santa Ana winds, when they come, are also very dry winds, are they not? Usually.
Yes. You get that downsloping effect where the winds come down the lee side of the mountain ranges here. It really warms up the atmosphere and also dries out very dramatically. I mean, you can see, in the space of an hour, when the Santa Ana kicks in, humidity is dropping from, say, maybe like 60, 70%. Then Santa Ana winds kick in, it drops down to like 10, 15% in less than an hour. So the changes from things can dry out very, very quickly when those winds kick in. And with Santa Ana winds, you definitely have humidities in the teens, maybe even single digits. And so it just ends up drying things out very quickly.
Wow, yeah, that would just dry your mouth out like yeah, if you open it and you go outside.
Chapstick.
Yeah, yeah, really blister things up. Can you talk a little bit about what you said about mountain waves?
Yes. Yeah. Well, mountain wave is like where you have, say, winds at, say, maybe 10,000 feet in the atmosphere that are perpendicular to the mountain ranges. In this case here in Southern California, we have a lot of like east-west oriented mountain ranges. So for the January 7th event, a lot of the upper level winds in the atmosphere were nearly perpendicular to those mountain ranges, the east-west mountain ranges. So when that happens is you'll get these mountain waves, kind of, these downsloping winds that will just kind of surface and then dissipate and surface again. So it's kind of a chaotic thing, but you get these just periods of these mountain waves where the wind surface just get really strong enhancement of the wind gusts. Then suddenly they're gone for a while, then they come back again. So we had that potential on top of what we're experiencing with the strong Santa Ana pattern. So it's just, just a combination, just a worst case scenario for us here in Southern California. Just a worst case scenario.
And what's going on offshore? during this time period, just off the coast, weather-wise?
Offshore, off the coast, those winds will come down across down mountain slopes and go all the way to the coastal plain and continue blowing out to the coastal waters. So here, if people, Southern California geography, we have Catalina Island, which is a pretty big, a nice touristy destination. We have the Channel Islands where people do a lot of, hiking and camping and so forth. And so even those islands offshore got impacted by some very strong northeasterly winds that, really, can cause serious conditions. Like on Catalina Island, on like Avalon Harbor, which is on the east side of the island, those strong sand and winds kick in. A lot of strong winds, get a lot of really rough seas that develop in the harbor and stuff. So they end up having to move the boats from Avalon Harbor to the other side of the island just to protect them. And so that's kind of what happens even offshore. Those winds just will continue blowing over the coastal waters and affect the islands too.
Yeah, and we normally hear, the weatherman on the TV talk about in California what's happening when we get a nice stretch of weather. There's high pressure off the coast, right? That's keeping the moisture away, and we're getting sunny skies and all that.
Yes.
Was that It wasn't a high pressure system though at that time, was it off the coast?
I think there's generally kind of a broad, like a ridge of high pressure along the west coast. But what really drove the event was being as a Santa Ana wind setup is you had like a system that dove down into the Great Basin, so like the Nevada area, that the Four Corners area that dove down there, a little system that dropped down there and brought a lot of cold air into that area, the Great Basin, and that really set up a really strong surface high pressure over Nevada, and that's what really drove this really strong pressure gradients, that helped produce this gusty Santa Ana winds. At the same time, you had kind of the ridge along the west coast, and then that kind of the system dropped down to the Great Basin. Is kind of set up a lot of northerly winds aloft in the atmosphere over the area, and those mixed down with the sunshine in the afternoon, and that really helped enhance the winds being produced by the pressure gradient. So just all combined, both that surface pressure gradient and the strong northerly winds aloft mixing down, that really generate are really significant Santa Ana wind events here in Southern California.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great overview of the big picture going on. It's a it's a whole Western state, Western regional phenomenon when this occurs.
Yeah.
But maybe we can zoom down to what we're talking about, the Santa Monica Mountains, right?
Yes.
And the San Gabriel Mountains that are going to be ignited on January 7th, 2025. Unfortunately, there are incidents, things that happened that caused a spark, and
Yeah.
in both of those mountain areas, almost at the same time, isn't that right?
Yes. Is just yeah, pretty much the same time in the morning and so forth. And so it's just when that occurred, you just knew something bad was going to be happening. Unfortunately, you just like
Right, right.
I was working the fire weather desk that morning. I saw the fire break out in the hills above Palisades, and it's like, okay, I'll be going to that fire tomorrow as an IMET. And then the fire broke out in the San Gabriel Mountains there. And it's like, okay, this is going to be a very bad situation, just a very bad situation. And unfortunately, it was.
Yeah. So, when you got to on the ground then, for as the incident meteorologist for the Palisades fire, were when you arrived, what were you seeing? What were you seeing happening with the winds and any embers that you were already noticing blowing
Well,
around?
what I was seeing when I got down to the ICP, which is the base camp for the fire, which is down at Zuma Beach. I got down there, all I could see was just and just the very strong and gusty northerly winds blowing down through the canyons there, the Santa Monica Mountains. The smoke was drifting from this was blowing, not drifting, was blowing from the Santa Monica's out over the ocean and so forth. So the air quality was very poor. The fire was just burning intensely because, again, the strong winds and the fact it was so dry that it was just, it looked pretty much like a nightmare, like you would expect, was looking at it, and but unfortunately, it's the same things I've seen many times in my IMED career. So it's like, okay, I know what I'm getting into here, and so it's just, you know,
Yeah.
just just something to see, and it's like I just knew it was like, okay, this is going to be a very impactful situation, and unfortunately, it was.
Yeah.
So
What time did you actually have to arrive there?
let's see. So the fire broke out on the 7th, so I got the notification to go for dispatch late in the day on the 7th. So I got there in the morning of the 8th, and as an IMET, we get to our instance within 24 hours. So I got there the 8th in the morning, and then just walk in the base camp. You get checked in, and then you just hit the ground running. Doing forecasts, doing briefings, all that sort of stuff. So I know I got there in the morning of the 8th and just hit the ground running and was busy, you know, for quite a few days on that incident.
Yeah. Was the news media already there to interview you at that time,
Oh,
or?
and yeah. So there's media everywhere, obviously. So yeah, they had that going on. So that's another part they do is that I'm at. Not only am I there to provide forecasts and weather briefings to keep the crews and the public safe, also I'm there to do media interviews for the information officers and do community meetings, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that also adds to the busyness of being an IMET when you're on an incident.
Yeah. So how do you decide when you can sort of pull away from focusing your attention on what's going on in the fire with enough time to then brief the news media? Does it happen at regular intervals, or do you just do it when you can?
Usually it's just kind of a catch as catch can because the media, like say, it might be TV station or maybe be like CNN or BBC or a local station or a local newspaper. They'll get a hold of the information officer and say, "I'd like to do an interview about the fire, about the fire weather." Then they'll come find me and they'll say, "Do you have time to do this, or when was a good time to do this?" And so we'll schedule it kind of like that way. So it's kind of most of the time I have time to prepare because I can say I can do the interview at 10:30 in the morning, or I can do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I can make sure that any of that sort of stuff that you're doing interviews for media does not interfere with my primary task, which is looking at the forecast,
Yeah.
looking at the radar and the satellite, making sure that I'm keeping all the weather information updated for the crews out in the field, because that's my primary focus is just to keep the firefighters safe. And so
Hmm.
all that other stuff, interviews, things like that, it's important as an I meant to do those things, but it's kind of a secondary thing, that I'll do when I'm not focused on something, more significant in terms of, watching the weather or doing a spot forecast for a division out there in the fire line, or even going out to the field with the fire behavior analyst and take looking at things and see how things are looking and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. So at that point, say soon after you arrived, or as the fire was really raging and moving its way down into the more built up areas of Pacific Palisades. Do you recall what the fire behavior strategist was telling you at the time?
basically, the fire behavior analyst was just saying, when I got there, and I've worked with them many times before, so we have a rapport and so forth. So I just, they just talking to them. It's like, yeah, this is just, it's just bad because it's burning into all the homes and, in the Palisades community and so forth. So he just knew that, yeah, this is a very bad situation. And so, we both kind of just, you know, uh, I guess relegated our mindset to that. It's going to be a very impactful, tragic sort of event, and just kind of, reacted accordingly in terms
Yeah,
of how we were going to handle it and so forth.
yeah. I mean, a fire a behavior specialist that you work with, are they with CAL FIRE normally?
Yeah, if I'm on a Cal Fire incident, then yeah, it's a Cal Fire behavior analyst. But also the Forest Service has fire behavior analysts, and sometimes depending on availability, you can get a Forest Service fire behavior analyst on a Cal Fire incident, and vice versa, just depending on their availability, because there aren't many of them out there in the world. So they have sometimes scrambled to to find one for an incident and so forth. But yeah, in this case here, it was a Cal Fire FM that I was working with.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm sure they were blown away, so to speak, by what they were seeing,
Well,
because
obviously, yes, they were to a point, much like me, but also we all of us have seen this kind of same thing over and over again, over our years of experience. So it's like, yeah, it's like,
yeah,
okay, it's
did
shocking,
it?
but not shocking to me to somebody who's like who never experienced it before. Like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
you've
right.
experienced it before, so it's like, it's not the same impact per se as would be somebody who's never experienced it before.
Yeah. How would you liken it to? Would you liken it to something like the Thomas Fire or the Woolsey Fire that you've seen before?
Well, I was actually I met on the Thomas Fire and the Woolsey Fire, so I was actually there on the ground as firsthand experiences I met for both those fires. And I always tell people in my IMET career, like I've done 84 incidents. For me, the Palisades fire is the second most impactful fire in my career. Number one is still the Thomas Fire for me. And the reason I say that is the Thomas Fire, not only did I work the fire for 14 days where, it was like 2 weeks straight of red flag conditions, and you had the, community of Ventura and being impacted and so forth. And, obviously some of my coworkers were in the area and so forth. So I had that sort of stress, but also on the Thomas Fire, if you remember the following January, there was the debris flow in Montecito.
Yep.
We had that tragic debris flow in Montecito. I was working the night shift that night where that occurred. So not only did I work the Thomas Fire as an IMED, I also worked that debris flow that morning in January. So that's why the Thomas Fire for me is the most impactful of my career, just because both the fire itself and just the debris flow afterwards.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, you
the
had
Palisades is a close second, and the Woolsey would be my third place fire in terms of impact for my career, just based on what it did, the damage it caused.
right.
So
Yeah. Just so our listeners are reminded, the Thomas Fire was in about the same time of the year, in December of 2017, and burned into January of 2018. It started not too far from the city of Ventura, burned 1,000 houses in Ventura, and then made its way up towards Santa Barbara, right? And over the course of several weeks, and was difficult to put out in that rugged terrain, burned enough of the area above Montecito to destabilize the very steep hill slope mountain really there, and then you had what I guess I would call a compound effect of the fire, right? When the rains came.
because we got the you know you have the fire, then you expect it's going to get rain eventually in the wintertime, and we got the rain in January, and it was just that morning of the debris flow, just a really strong little line of storms went over the Montecito area. Wasn't huge or anything like that, nothing like you see in the Midwest or anything. It was just a small little band of very intense rainfall, and just the wrong place, the wrong time. That intense rainfall hit those hills above Montecito and the burn scar, and all that debris just came rolling on down the hills and so forth. And got the tragedy where it was like, but over 25 people were killed, and so forth. So it's just, for me, my weather service career, that is the most impactful event of anything I've dealt with in my entire career. It's always going to be with me, just because we did everything right, but still you have the tragedy, which is kind of the nature of the meteorology business. You can
Yeah.
have the forecast, great messaging, all this stuff, and you still end up having the tragedies like the Montecito debris flow or like a wildfire. So it's just, it's kind of the frustrating part of being in this job.
Right, sure. Well, if there's one phenomenon we may understand less than where a wildfire will burn, it's what a hill slope will do that's been burned after the wildfire, and its stability, right? That's where the geologists have to come in, geologists, the
Yeah,
geomorphologists, as we call them, and
yeah,
that's very tricky, I'm sure.
yeah, exactly. Because after a fire, we work closely with USGS to come up with those burn area thresholds for rainfall that are going to cause like maybe minor debris flows or major debris flows. So we work closely with them to come up with these thresholds, and it's much like meteorology. It's not a perfect science. We can get heavy rain over burn scar and nothing happens. Next time get heavy rain and something does happen. So it's just, we're still, you know, definitely learning about the whole interaction there and so forth. But yeah, it's just,
Yeah, and I'm sure that the general public, when the mud flow was reported in Montecito, because it impacted some very high profile people as well who live in Montecito, right? Some world famous celebrities who live there. That
it's a
got
high rent district, yes. It's a high
that
rent
got
district.
huge news coverage, and probably very few people linked it back to the Thomas fire.
Yeah,
So, but that was why it happened, probably. Major contributing factor anyway. Um,
exactly.
so I guess if we can move back though to I guess January 8th in Pacific Palisades. Your fire behaviorist had already seen you've seen the fire move into the more heavily developed areas, and now it's an urban fire, right?
Yeah.
It's a full on urban fire, and one structure is the fuel for the next structure. And do you, as an incident meteorologist, do you have the kind of data you need to look at that level of granularity in terms of passage or transmission of the fire from one structure to the next, or do you kind of have to move out to the neighborhood level and start looking at it?
Yeah, for me as an IMET, the big thing for me with a situation like this, like the Palisades, was the more data I have, the better. And so, we have various observing stations across the Santa Monica's that report, temperature, humidity, wind 24/7. And so that's what I'm, really that's my main source of information is what's currently happening on the ground from these different sensors. So that's kind of the resolution I have. Am I forecasting down from one house to the next in the neighborhood? No, but then that's given what I do as an IMET, that's not kind of my lane, you know, but I can forecast, okay, we have, I'm seeing the sensor over here is reporting wind gusts of 50 miles per hour. And so that we're probably getting 50-mile-an-hour winds across this particular area of the fire, or humidity is this level and so forth. So I guess you could say kind of a neighborhood level, I guess, is kind of what I'm looking at,
Uh-huh.
because I'm not going to get down to the weeds of one lot to the next lot to the next lot. I mean, I just know that you have strong winds, you have a fire burn, you're going to get ember cast that's going to, spot the fire out ahead of itself. And depending on the strength of the winds, that determines how far that spotting distance is, and and that's where the fire behavior analyst comes in, kind of taking my weather forecast and kind of figuring out those things, like what's going to be the spotting distance, what's the
Right.
probability the fire is igniting and things like that. So
Right. So could you describe for us like the assets you had technologically at that point? You had satellite data
oh yes,
from NOAA, from the National Weather Service, right? You had
yeah,
geostationary satellite data. You
yeah.
had some thermal data, I assume, from the NASA satellites.
Mhm.
Um, and but you don't get that very often, I know, as often as you'd probably like it. Did you also have any airborne assets that you could rely on?
Basically, what I had at my disposal, IMETs are very mobile. Outside of our camping gear, we have just in terms of the gear we have to do our forecast, we have a laptop, a cell phone, and a printer. All right. So we're very mobile. We can jump from one spot to the next pretty easily. But yeah, so as IMET, the tools I had on the Palisades fire was obviously first and foremost, I talked about I had all the surface observations. So I could go into Meso West or the Weather and Hazards data viewer and look at what was currently happening at various observation sites across the Santa Monica's and across Southern California. So I get an idea, where the strongest winds were, how strong they were currently. So I have that. Then with my laptop, I have access to the satellite data, both the GOES imagery, so like visible imagery, infrared imagery, the fire sensor stuff on the GOES satellite. I have access to that, and that updates pretty quickly. We have like mesosectors that updates like every 5 minutes or over a minute even. So I have had access to very current satellite data. Also had current access to the current models. We have, as you know, and your listeners probably know, we have various computer models that we meteorologists use to help make our forecasts that run at various scales and various time scales and things like that. So that's the information I had. So I had the satellite, current satellite data, I had observation network, I had computer models, and also one of the most vital things for for an IMET on a fire is ground truth from the folks out in the field. So I'll have, I'll get observations from the firefighters on the fire line tell me exactly what they're observing at a particular location. So it helps me, fine tune and calibrate my forecast accordingly.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that's coming in and you're trying to put all that together from different locations all at once. But it's got to be some of the most valuable information you have. Are they sending you video too?
Hmm?
Do they ever send you video from the field?
Occasionally, they'll send me pictures or videos from like if they have a cell signal. I mean, obviously, in some
Mhm.
areas you're not going to have out in the field, you're not going to have a really good cell service. But when they get back or get cell service, and they'll send me videos occasionally or sometimes pictures, so I can actually see visually what's it. Also, has actually mentioned that another powerful tool that we have now in California is we have a great, huge network of fire cameras, the Alert Fire Cam network. So there's probably a couple hundred webcams across the entire state of California that give you real time, video of what's happening in different areas and so forth. So they had access to that too. So I can monitor, kind of what's going on out there in the field. Even at base camp, I get at least an idea video wise what's going on from these different webcams and stuff like that. So that's another really useful tool that we have in the fire business is those alert fire webcams.
Yeah.
They've been a great benefit to us the last several years. I definitely, yeah, it's just like such a useful data source for us.
Yeah. So was there any one particular image that you can recall that stood out to you from seeing it in during the Palisades fire that
Uh,
you found more stunning than
I
anything
remember seeing
else?
some pictures from like going up a little going further west on the Pacific Coast Highway, the PCH, and someone took a couple pictures where you could just see, you could see the glow of the fire in the foothills, and you just see the plume of smoke going over Palisades and Santa Monica. It was just a really kind of you know, kind of an awe-inspiring photo that I've seen. I think I think a Cal Fire firefighter took it, I believe, but it was just like you look at it, it's like, wow, just all this black smoke just blowing over the city of Santa Monica and out to the ocean and so forth. It's just like, wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, you wonder first, like, is it coming towards me and then what's in it?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
because if it's burning from a city structure, it's got vehicles burning, it's got cars, trucks, diesel fuel, all kinds
Oh
of
yeah.
noxious things burning, as opposed to my nice
So
my nice little shrubs up there in the not in the hills, which are far less noxious, in terms of what they can produce, right?
yeah, definitely. So the Palisades revenue, you had like say vehicles are burning, homes are burning. You have solar panels and things like that. So all this, whatever is in all that stuff, just in that smoke, also along with whatever burning from the vegetation. Yeah, so that smoke was just nasty, and so breathing that in would not be a good thing. And
Yeah.
that's where I'm really impressed. That's one thing I'm always impressed by the firefighters out in the line. They're out there 16 hours a day breathing that stuff in. It's just remarkable the job that they do under the conditions they have to do it in. It's just always amazes me.
Yeah.
Ever since I
Yeah.
started this job,
Absolutely.
I'm just amazed at how the firefighters do what they do out there. Because those conditions would just be, I wouldn't be able to deal with them.
Yeah.
It's like
And
so
and
they're definitely true rock stars in this whole thing. So I definitely have the utmost respect for any and all wildland firefighters who do this job. It's just like, I have my small role as an IMET, help them out, keep them safe, but what they do is just truly just amazing.
yeah, no, they're superheroes. There's no doubt about it. And I'm in total awe of them myself. Same as you. Thank goodness we have them.
Yeah,
Otherwise, things would get a lot worse. I mean, during the Palisades, early part of the Palisades fire, people were abandoning their vehicles and just walking out on foot, weren't they? From from
Yeah,
the upper developments there, and so the firefighters also had to clear out those vehicles with bulldozers, didn't they?
exactly. Unfortunately, despite the fire risk throughout the entire state of California, a lot of communities don't have a really good idea of how to get out of their community if a fire is coming down upon them. And I think that was the case of Palisades, and all the roads leading out of the Palisades community were just getting clogged by everybody. And yeah, so cars were left there, people were just walking out, running out there. And so the firefighters had to, bring dozers in, I think, and move some of these cars out of the way so they could actually get their trucks up into the area to actually fight the fire. So yeah, it just, these wildland urban interface fires, it just becomes such a, it's such a cluster of all this of people trying to evacuate and the firefighters trying to get in there. So it ends up can be being a big mess.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. At some point, the firefighters have to make a tough decision, don't they? Where they say we can either try to fight this fire down where we conventionally would fight it, on the urban interface, say, to try to stop it from moving further into the developed areas, or take our resources and get the area cleared up farther up the hill so that there's access and people can evacuate. I mean, you're in rescue mode at that point instead of firefighting mode. And I don't know if you as a meteorologist get in, if they consult you at any time during that decision making process.
they'll consult the IMED when it comes to like doing like evacuations and repopulations of the citizens, but also even but in terms of how they're actually, actually fighting the fire tactically. So they'll use our forecast and factor that into their decisions. But our input comes quite a bit. Like say, if do we have to evacuate this community, or can we repopulate this area? Based on the weather and fire behavior conditions and so forth. So we do factor into that a lot of the decision making process.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's got to be an integrated decision and a very tough one, I'm sure, when you're.
Admittedly, of course, everything on a wildfire has some sort of weather component as a part of the decision making process.
Uh-huh.
You know, because so that's why we're there to provide that most accurate, most up to date weather information. They can make all these decisions they have to make. I
Yeah.
would
And
say so it's definitely quite a responsibility, but definitely makes this job very rewarding.
yeah. And so with something like the Palisades fire, were you also being asked to look forward, say to the next day? What's it going to be like the next day so that we
Oh
can get
yes,
get ready for that?
oh yes. As an IMET, we do like two different types of forecasts. We do like an operational forecast, which is the following operational period. So like what they're going to do tonight or do tomorrow. We give them the forecast for that. And also we're looking out further ahead, out 3, 5, 7, 10 days about okay, uh, the winds are going to diminish, but they're going to pick up again on Saturday, or we might have a good chance of rain coming in on Sunday and things like that. So we're looking further out, not just like 12, 24 hours. We're looking out several days in advance for a forecast and letting the management team who's managing the fire know weather-wise what they can expect coming up in the next few days, because that can sometimes takes a couple of days to to do certain things on a fire. If they have to do this or that, so they like as much advance notice as possible for any upcoming weather changes. So we're looking out several days in advance. So
Yeah, yeah, because they're probably looking ahead and seeing the direction the fire's going and saying, we're going to have to be ready to steer it around this area when it, you know, in
yeah,
2 days to save this other
yeah,
community. And so that's they're working in several time dimensions there. I'm sure I've heard
yeah,
them talk about that and what a talent that is to be able to multitask that way.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
hey,
I think general public needs to realize there's a lot more that goes into fighting wildfire than they might actually think in terms of decisions and equipment and things like that. It's something fascinating to observe every time on an incident. I'm just fascinated by the entire process.
yeah,
It's because it's just like wow.
yeah, because every fire is different and they have characteristics of a living organism, right? I mean that
Yes, they do.
unpredictable.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we try to predict as best we can, but again, as I said, meteorology is not a perfect science. Fire behavior is not a perfect science. Mother Nature will do what it wants to do, no matter what my forecast might say.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
right. You can only be so certain about it, but I'm sure you guys are the best. So lucky to have you. So I got to ask you before we wrap it up here. We're almost at time that we usually
sure.
end, but I got to ask you the big future question. Um, do you think we're heading for increasing frequency of incidents like this? Is there any evidence that it's on the rise? Incidents like the Palisades fire.
That's a tough one to answer. I mean, I think people across the entire country, and especially the West Coast, the Western United States, with all the recent fires we've had, Palisades fire, the Thomas fire, the Camp Fire up in Northern California, they've become, you know, really significant, tragic, impactful fires. So it's at the forefront of people's minds now and so forth. And so I think there's definitely a lot more attention paid to it. But in terms of, you know, foreseeing is it going to get worse or better for like the wildland urban interface, that's hard to tell because there's so many factors going into it. It's not only is the weather, but it's, obviously a lot of political things in terms of, you know, clearing brush and having resources and things like that. So there's a lot that so many different things that go into, that situation. That's really hard to tell, or I think to predict how it's going to be in the future. I mean, I would hope
Hmm.
people are a lot more sensitive now, a lot more in tune to like, okay, I live in a wildland urban interface. I better be prepared, make sure I have my brush cleared around my home, make sure I know have an escape plan and a to-go bag and so forth, and then communities and fire agencies and county and state
Yeah,
level agencies all are, understanding the risks out there and hopefully mitigating them as best they can. And
yeah, yeah.
you know,
There's one thing
but
we're pretty sure of as climatologists, and that is that it's going to continue to warm. It's going to continue to be warm and drier. I think almost
mm,
every model for California says that. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so, yes. And then, you know, and again, so that's something to factor into all these decisions and all these, contingency plans and things like that. So it's just, it's definitely, it is a situation that's never going to be, you know, uh, solved, I think, per se. There's always going to be this issue, you're always probably going to have these big, huge, impactful wildfires impacting communities just because, we have to, there's just so many people out there, so many communities that, you start building into more wildfire prone areas and so forth. And it's just, something that's got to be factored into the whole planning process, I think.
Yeah, yeah. That's a whole other dimension to it. Is
Yes, it
after
is.
a community has been impacted, and there are very few left that haven't been impacted in some way to burn on the wildland urban interface. It's like, how are you going to build back? Are you going to build back exactly the way it was before? Because that's risky, you know,
Yeah, it is.
to not create fuel breaks, to not create, buffer zones where firefighters can work within and protect your community a little bit more efficiently, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that communities and agencies can do to help mitigate wildfire impacts. They just got to do them, and sometimes that's the toughest thing. I think, I mean, obviously, well outside my lane, well above my pay grade and so forth, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, it's just got to do. There are things they can do to mitigate the stuff. They just need to be done, and unfortunately, sometimes might not be a pleasant situation to get this to do some of these things, but they need to be done just because we've seen with all these fires in recent years how devastating they can be, and there might have been ways maybe to limit the devastation, potentially,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. I think it's a whole career path that
Yeah.
more
Yes.
young people should take is how to design
Yes.
cities and towns and the communities around them to be fire safe, fire resilient, fire resistant,
Yes.
um,
Totally agree.
and it's a great it's an exciting and rewarding path to take that brings together all the disciplines of land use planning and ecology and weather and topography, everything. So we need
Yeah.
more people going into that area.
If I was younger, I'd actually go into that route, but yeah, I'm old now, so I'm by ways being an IMED. So
Well, we're both old, but we've seen a lot, and this was the purpose of the podcast. Really was to capture uh, for posterity's sake um, what's happened. That's what we want to do with this, and not lose that collective knowledge of people like you who've experienced so much. So Rich, thank you so much for taking the time today out of your busy schedule. I hope it doesn't get busier
yeah,
with any sort of incident. But thanks again. You were a great guest,
thank you.
uh, and
Well,
I thank you for pivoting in so many different directions with me.
no
Um,
problem.
so wish you a safe upcoming season of predictions and minor incidents for hope that you're called to. And so we hope the same happens here in Northern California too. So thanks
Most
again.
definitely.
So
Uh,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, you're welcome. This was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. You'll be hearing yourself on the podcast in not too distant future. So, listeners, that wraps up another episode of When Wildfire Comes. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues that we're talking both about fire safety and the science behind it, because there's a lot the science and technology will be able to add to this and keep us safer. So, to all the listeners, goodbye. Until next time, and be fire safe.